After my husband's funeral, I found a note in his safe. Don't sign. Then my son called. Mom, I just need a few signature. Hi, welcome to my new story.
The night after my husband's funeral, I opened the safe he had locked every night for 40 years. Inside, behind familiar stacks of papers, was a sealed envelope with the words, "Do not open until they ask you to sign." I didn't understand its meaning until my son called me to the dining table and said, "Just a few signatures, Mom." I smiled, took the envelope into my study, and opened it. I couldn't believe what I saw. "You being here means more than you know. Leave a comment below, tell me your country or city. Let's see how many corners of the world this story has reached." This story includes fictional elements built for entertainment and educational purposes. Names, places, and details are coincidental, but the message woven through every scene is one I hope you carry with you. The sound of rolling suitcase wheels on hardwood floors is not something you forget. I remember standing at the top of the stairs that June evening, watching Nathan maneuver two oversized bags through the front door, while Brooke held it open with her shoulder, her phone pressed to her ear, already talking to someone about something that had nothing to do with us. The old oak floors, the same ones Thomas had refinished by hand, the summer of 2004, down on his knees with sandpaper, and a patience I had always admired, groaned under the weight of their luggage. I watched the wheels leave faint marks in the grain and thought about how long those marks would take to disappear. Nathan looked up and smiled. That smile. Wide practice, the kind that arrives a half second too quickly to be entirely natural. "Mom, we really appreciate this. Just until the Portland deal closes. 6 months tops." I said what a mother says. I told him, of course. I told him this was his home, too. I meant it the way you mean things before you understand what they're going to cost you. Thomas said nothing that evening at dinner. He passed the bread, refilled my water glass, asked Brooke polite questions about her design work. But later, after Nathan and Brooke had gone upstairs and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, he sat on the edge of our bed and said something I would turn over in my mind many times in the months that followed. "Watch how a person treats your mail, Marge. It tells you everything." I asked him what he meant. He just patted my hand and reached over to turn off the lamp. That was Thomas. He rarely said the whole thing out loud. The first 2 months were manageable the way a slow leak is manageable before you notice the floor is warped. Nathan was charming at dinner, helpful with the grocery runs, generous with compliments about the house. Brooke reorganized the kitchen. The third week, moved the coffee mugs to a different cabinet, rearranged the spice rack in an order that made no sense to me. And when I mentioned it, she apologized so warmly that I felt unreasonable for bringing it up at all. It was the mail that I noticed first. Our box sat at the end of the front walk, a green-painted cast-iron fixture Thomas had installed in 1998. For 25 years, I had been the one to collect it each morning after my second cup of coffee. Sometime around mid-July, I came downstairs one morning to find the day's mail already stacked on the kitchen counter, sorted into 2 piles. One pile Nathan had labeled household utility bills, a furniture catalog, a card from our neighbor, Helen. The other pile he had set aside in a rubber-banded stack he called admin, which turned out to contain my bank statements, a letter from our financial advisor, and a notice from the county assessor's office. I stood at the counter and looked at those 2 piles for a long time. I thought about what Thomas had said. I didn't move the mail. I didn't say anything. I picked up the household pile and left the admin stack exactly where Nathan had placed it. It was a Tuesday morning in August when I first heard the name Dale. I was deadheading the roses along the back fence, a late summer chore Thomas had always claimed to hate, and always ended up doing anyway, when Nathan's voice carried through the open kitchen, window above me. He was on the phone, his tone low and quick, the voice he used when he thought no one could hear him. "Dale, give me 2 more weeks. The paperwork isn't ready, and she's not, no, I know the timeline. Just hold on." A pause. Then, "She's fine. She left the stove on again yesterday. She called the Hendersons by the wrong name twice last week. It's fine, Dale. Trust me." I set down my clippers and stood very still among the roses. The stove I had left on was intentional a pot of water I'd walked away from to answer the phone, and simply forgotten to mention when I came back. The Hendersons I had called by the wrong name were new neighbors I had genuinely not yet learned to place. But I heard how Nathan had assembled those two small details into something else entirely, packaged them up, and delivered them to someone named Dale as evidence of something. I filed the name away. Dale. I had no idea yet who Dale was or what the paperwork was or what timeline Nathan was referring to. But I had spent 32 years at the IRS learning that the most useful things you will ever hear are the things people say when they believe no one important is listening. I picked up my clippers and went back to the roses. By September, Nathan had introduced the subject of what he called the family trust. He brought it up at dinner one evening casually, the way you raise a topic you have been rehearsing for weeks while making it sound like it just occurred to you. It's really just a smart way to structure things, Mom. Avoids the estate tax mess down the road. Sylvia Henderson down the street did the same thing last year. Her accountant recommended it. I looked up from my plate. That sounds complicated. It's not, actually. I can walk you through everything whenever you're ready. No rush. I nodded in the way I had begun to practice a slow, slightly uncertain nod, the nod of a woman whose thoughts arrived a few seconds behind the conversation. Nathan's shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. He changed the subject to a property he was showing in Bellevue, and I listened and asked small questions and said nothing more about the trust. Later that evening, I went to the kitchen to make tea and found an envelope on the counter. My name on the front, the return address of my bank in the upper left corner. The seal had been opened. Not torn, steamed. The paper carried the faint warped texture that moisture leaves behind when it dries. I held it under the kitchen light and ran my thumb along the edge of the flap. Then I folded it and put it in the pocket of my cardigan and went to the study. That night, I sat in Thomas's chair in the library, the old leather one beside the window that still held the shape of him, still smelled faintly of the cedar oil he used on the shelves, and I looked across the room at the small wall safe behind the framed Puget Sound watercolor. Thomas had been meticulous about that safe. Every night before bed, the same ritual, right hand on the dial, left hand, steadying the lower corner of the door, a quiet click as the latch engaged. I had watched him do it so many times that the motion lived somewhere in my body the way a song does, recalled without effort. The safe looked the same as always. The watercolor hung straight. The dial sat at 0, but the door was not flush against the frame. A gap, thin as a playing card, no more. A shadow along the left edge where there should have been none. I did not get up. I sat in Thomas's chair and looked at that shadow and let what it meant arrange itself slowly in my mind the way I had always done my best thinking without rushing toward a conclusion, just watching what the facts chose to become when you gave them enough silence. Someone had been at that safe, and whoever it was had not gotten in, not yet. The rain had been coming down since noon. By 11 that night, the house on Whitmore Lane had gone quiet in the way old houses do after grief passes through them, a heaviness in the walls, a stillness that feels less like peace and more like held breath. Nathan and Brooke had gone upstairs hours ago. I had heard their door close, heard the low murmur of the television through the ceiling, and then nothing. I sat in the library for a long time before I moved. When I finally crossed to the safe, I did not turn on the overhead light. The small lamp on the writing desk gave enough. I had always preferred it that way in this room, the kind of light that keeps the shadows where they belong at the edges, where you can see them. I placed my palm flat against the safe door. Cold. The metal was always cold, even in summer, but tonight it felt different, the cold of something that had been disturbed and not quite settled back into itself. I moved my hand slowly to the dial, and that was when I felt it. Along the upper rim of the door frame, faint but unmistakable to a fingertip that knew what it was looking for, a series of small scratches, the kind left by someone working a tool they were not entirely sure how to use. Someone had tried, and whoever it was had not succeeded. I thought of Thomas. 40 years of watching him close this safe before bed every night without exception. I did not need to think about the combination it lived in my hands the way his voice lived in my memory, present without effort. I entered the combination, the one only he and I had ever known, and felt the mechanism disengage. The safe held what it always held: my good jewelry in the velvet roll Thomas had bought me for our 20th anniversary. The property deed, the original, in its manila sleeve. Our life insurance policies clipped together with a binder clip he had labeled in his neat accountant's hand. A folder of medical records going back 15 years. I checked each item carefully. Nothing was missing. But at the very back behind the insurance folder, my fingers found something that had not been there the last time I opened this safe. 2 items. The first was a manila envelope, thick, sealed with packing tape along every edge, Thomas's handwriting on the tab in the same neat capitals he used when something was meant to be found and not missed. Beneath the label, in smaller letters, a single instruction written in blue ink: do not open until someone asks you to sign something. I set it on the writing desk without opening it. The second was smaller, a white business envelope unsealed with a single index card inside. I recognized his handwriting before I even unfolded it, the slight leftward lean he'd had since the 3rd grade. The way his 7s always had a crossbar through the middle, because an elementary school teacher had once insisted on it, and the habit had stayed with him for 60 years. I sat down in his chair and read it. Marge. I started watching 3 years ago. I kept hoping I was wrong. I wasn't. Go see Harold first, 412 Mercer Street. He's expecting you, or he will be if things went the way I think they did. He has the real paperwork. Don't let anyone come with you. Everything else is in the envelope. But go see Harold first. I love you. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I kept thinking I could fix it myself. I read it twice. Then I set the index card on the desk beside the envelope and sat with my hands folded in my lap, and the rain moving against the window and the lamp making its small circle of light in the dark. Room. Thomas had known. For 3 years he had known something watched, something documented something and said nothing to me. I tried to find anger in that and couldn't not entirely. I knew him too well. He would have had reasons. He always had reasons, careful and considered and frustratingly sound. Whatever he had seen, whatever he had decided, he had also prepared for the possibility that he would not be here to explain it in person. He had left me a map. The envelope sat on the desk, sealed, heavy, patient. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I set it back down. Thomas had been precise about most things. He had been precise about this, too. I would wait until the condition was met. The coffee had gone cold without me noticing. That was how I knew I had been working for a long time, not by the light changing in the windows. Though the gray of a Seattle dawn had replaced the gray of a Seattle night sometime in the past hour, but by the temperature of the cup when I finally reached for it. Cold coffee and a stiff lower back, the twin signatures of a long night at a desk. I set the cup down and kept reading. Thomas's envelope had contained 41 pages, bank statements, printed transaction records, a handful of handwritten notes in his careful accountant's script. I had spread them across the writing desk in the order he had arranged them. He had numbered each page in the upper right corner, lightly in pencil, the way he numbered everything, and I had gone through them the way I had once gone through thousands of documents just like them, slowly, completely, without skipping anything. My first supervisor at the IRS, a compact woman named Ruth Haverford, who wore the same cardigan in 3 different colors and never raised her voice, had told me something on my first day that I had never forgotten. Numbers don't lie, Margaret. People do. Learn to tell the difference. She had said it matter-of-factly, the way you state a thing that is simply true, and then she had set a 2-inch stack of financial records on my desk and told me to find what was wrong with them. It had taken me 4 hours. It would take me 40 minutes now. Some things you get faster at. The pattern in Thomas's documents had taken me perhaps 20 minutes to identify, which told me it had been designed by someone who understood the basics of financial concealment, but not the finer points. The withdrawals from our joint savings account were consistent, never above $4,000 in a single transaction, always spaced at least 11 days apart, always initiated on weekdays between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. Someone had known enough to stay below the threshold that triggers automatic federal reporting. Someone had known enough to avoid round numbers, which draw attention the way round numbers always do. But they had not known or had not bothered to vary the pattern itself. 36 months of the same spacing, the same range, the same time window. To a casual observer, the account simply appeared to be draining at the natural rate of a retired couple, drawing down their savings. To someone who had spent 32 years examining accounts for exactly this kind of movement, it looked like what it was. The reference codes attached to each transaction all traced to the same originating entity. I opened Thomas's laptop. He had left the password written inside the back cover of his address book, which was the kind of thing that would have made his colleagues laugh and which I had always found quietly endearing and spent 15 minutes on the Washington and Oregon Secretary of State. Business registries, both of which are public record and accessible to anyone with an internet connection. The entity was registered in Oregon. Cascade Valley Property Solutions, LLC. Registered Agent Dale R. Pruitt. Principal address a street in Medford I had never heard of. Formed 3 years and 2 months ago, 4 months before the first withdrawal appeared on our statement. Dale R. Pruitt. The name Nathan had spoken into his phone on a warm August afternoon while I stood among the roses and held very still. I wrote the name on a clean sheet of paper. Beneath it, I wrote the formation date. Beneath that, I began adding the withdrawals month by month, working through Thomas's pages in order, writing each figure in a column the way Ruth Haverford had taught me no shortcuts. No estimates every number confirmed before the next one is entered. It took me 11 minutes. When I reached the bottom of the column and drew a line beneath the last entry, the total was $186,000. I wrote it out on a fresh sheet of paper. Not the column, just the number by itself in the center of the page. $186,000. I set the pen down and looked at it. Thomas and I had saved that money across 4 decades, not from large salaries or windfalls or fortunate investments, from a government pension and a careful accounting practice, and the kind of discipline that comes from growing up without much and deciding early that security was worth the sacrifices it required. We had never touched the principal, not for the roof repair in 2011, not for the repairs after the storm, not for anything. It was the kind of savings that represented not just money, but a particular way of living a long argument in favor of patience. $186,000, gone in monthly increments through an LLC registered in Oregon to a man named Dale Pruitt, whose phone number was apparently stored in my son's contacts under a name I had not yet been able to see. I sat with that for a while. Not with grief exactly. Something quieter than grief and more durable. The specific weight of a thing you have confirmed when some part of you was still hoping the math would come out differently. The footsteps on the stairs came at 7:30. I heard them before I saw him. The third step from the bottom had always creaked. 40 years of living in this house had taught me every voice it had, and by the time Nathan appeared in the library doorway, the page with the number on it was folded in thirds and sitting beneath my left hand, and I had Thomas's documents gathered into a loose stack on the far edge of the desk face down. He was dressed already. That was the thing I noticed. 7:45 in the morning, and he had his jacket on. "Morning, Mom." The smile came first broad and easy, the same one I had watched him practice since he was 17. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep, sweetheart." I turned in the chair to face him and made my expression soft and slightly tired the way it had looked since June without any effort on my part. "All the people yesterday. It wore me out." He nodded with practiced sympathy and said something about making breakfast, and I said that would be lovely, and he disappeared toward the kitchen with the comfortable confidence of a man who believes the hardest part of his plan is already behind him. I waited until I heard the refrigerator open. Then I unfolded the page, looked at the number one more time, and put it in the pocket of my cardigan. There was work to do. He was wearing a blazer to breakfast. Not a sport coat, not a casual layer thrown over a shirt, a proper dark blazer with a pocket square pressed and deliberate at 7:45 in the morning in his mother's kitchen. I stood in the doorway for a moment before he saw me long enough to take that detail in and set it next to the one Thomas had offered me years ago. One evening when we were watching a neighbor host a backyard barbecue in a button-down shirt and chinos while everyone else wore shorts. A man who overdresses for breakfast is always trying to sell you something, Marge. Thomas had been talking about our neighbor, but he could have been talking about anyone. He had a gift for observations that seemed small at the time and turned out to be universal. Nathan turned from the counter and smiled when he saw me. There she is. Sit down, Mom, I made eggs. Brooke was already at the table, her phone face down beside her plate in the studied way of someone performing attentiveness. She looked up and said good morning with the warmth she deployed the way a hotel concierge does, genuine enough on the surface, calibrated underneath. I had never disliked Brooke. I had simply never been able to locate the place where her performance ended and her actual self began. I sat down and wrapped both hands around the coffee cup she slid toward me, and I let my shoulders settle into the slight forward curve I had been practicing since June. The posture of a woman carrying more weight than she was used to, a woman whose mornings had gotten harder. It was not entirely an act. Some of it was simply true. Nathan set the eggs down and took his seat, and we talked about nothing for a few minutes, the way families do the weather. The neighbor who had left a casserole on the porch yesterday. Whether the gutters needed cleaning before the fall, rain started in earnest. He was good at this. He had always been good at this, the easy surface of conversation, the comfortable current that carries you along before you notice where it's going. He reached beside his chair and brought up a manila folder, set it on the table beside his plate. Did not open it yet. Mom, I wanted to talk to you about something while we had a quiet moment. He said it the way you say something you have rehearsed until it sounds unrehearsed. Nothing urgent. Just some paperwork that would make things a lot simpler down the road. Estate stuff, mostly. Dad would have wanted it sorted. He always did that invoked Thomas in the present tense of preference. Dad would have wanted, as though Thomas's wishes were a resource available for Nathan's use. What kind of paperwork, I asked. I let the question come out slightly slow, slightly effortful, the way questions come when your mind is still working through grief, and ordinary things require more effort than they used to. He opened the folder. 3 documents paper-clipped separately, a cover sheet on top with a brief summary in bullet points. He had prepared this carefully. The cover sheet was designed to look simple. Friendly, almost. It's called a family management trust, he said. It basically consolidates the house and Dad's accounts into one structure. Way easier to manage, way better for taxes. Tons of people do it when... He paused just long enough to acknowledge the circumstances without dwelling in them when there's a loss in the family. He turned the folder toward me and I looked at it. The document on top was a quitclaim deed. I knew what a quitclaim deed was, the way I knew what a Phillips screwdriver was, not because I needed one every day, but because I had spent 3 decades examining financial instruments and the documents that accompanied them, and a quitclaim deed is among the simplest and most commonly misused of all of them. It transfers property quickly and cleanly with no warranties, no guarantees, no opportunity for the signing party to easily undo what they have done. It is the instrument of choice when someone needs a signature more than they need the other person to understand what they are signing. I picked it up and held it at the slight distance of someone who needs reading glasses and has forgotten to bring them. Is this the paper that helps with taxes, Nathan? He nodded immediately. Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And this one. I lifted the second document, which was a beneficiary change form for a life insurance policy I had held in my own name since 1997. That's just updating the listed beneficiary. Right now, it goes through probate, which takes forever and costs money. This routes it directly through the trust. Much cleaner. I set it down and picked up the third. An investment account management transfer authorizing sole management authority to the trustee, Nathan's name printed neatly in the designated field. There are so many pages, I said. I know it looks like a lot, but it's really just 3 signatures. He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and produced a pen. Set it on the table between us, parallel to the folder edge, with the precision of a man who had imagined this moment and wanted it to go smoothly. Nice and easy, Mom. Right here, here, and here. I looked at the pen. I looked at my son. His eyes were steady and warm and patient. He believed he was looking at a 70-year-old woman in the first weeks of grief, a woman whose mind had been softening at the edges for months. A woman who called the neighbors by the wrong name and left the stove on and would not know a quit-claim deed from a grocery list. I thought about the page folded in my cardigan pocket, about the number written in the center of it. "Let me sleep on it, sweetheart." I touched the folder lightly the way you touch something you intend to return to and pushed it an inch back toward him. "My head isn't clear today. You know how I get." Something moved behind his eyes. Brief a flicker of recalculation like a man adjusting a calculation he had been certain of. Then it settled back into patience. "Of course," he said. "Whenever you're ready." I went upstairs after breakfast and stood at the bedroom window. Nathan was on the front porch below his back to the house phone pressed to his ear. His free hand moved as he talked short, clipped gestures, the body language of a man working to keep frustration out of his voice and not entirely succeeding. I could not hear a word through the glass. I did not need to. I knew the particular quality of that posture, the angle of the shoulders, the slight forward lean of a person delivering news they had hoped not to have to deliver. There was only one person Nathan called when things were not going according to plan. I stood at the window and watched him until he ended the call. Then I turned and sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands for a moment. The hands that had reviewed thousands of documents, that could recognize a fraudulent instrument by the weight of the paper and the spacing of the type. "Sleep on it," I had told him. What I had not told him was that I had not slept in 36 hours, and I was not tired in the least. Someone had just asked me to sign something. The condition had been met. I went to the library and opened the envelope. The workshop smelled the way it always had, old paper and linen thread, and the particular dry sweetness of hide glue that has been warming slowly on a low burner. Somewhere beneath that faint and persistent, the cedar oil Thomas used on the shelves. I had told Nathan I was going downstairs to work. "It helps me," I had said with the slightly unfocused look I had been perfecting since breakfast, keeping my hands busy. He had nodded with the generous understanding of a man who finds other people's grief convenient. And I had come down the stairs and closed the workshop door behind me and stood in the middle of the room for a moment with my eyes closed. This was the one place in the house that still felt entirely like itself. The work table ran the length of the east wall, lit by 3 adjustable lamps I had positioned over the years until the light fell exactly where I needed it. Above the table, pegboard held my tools in their assigned places. Bone folders and awls and backing hammers and micro spatulas, each one hanging from its own hook. Each hook labeled in Thomas's handwriting on small strips of masking tape. He had labeled everything. It had driven me gently crazy for 40 years. I had not moved a single label since the spring. I sat down on my stool and looked at the partially restored volume on the center of the table. A 19th century botanical atlas I had been working on since the spring, its spine detached, its pages foxed and fragile with age. I did not touch it. I had not come down here to restore a book. Thomas had given me the UV lamp 7 years ago, a birthday gift wrapped in the kind of deliberate understatement he favored a plain white box, no bow, a card that said only, "For your books, Marge," though I suspect you'll find other uses for it someday. I had laughed when I read it. I had assumed he meant the practical kind of other uses, checking for water damage on old paper, identifying repaired tears, the ordinary forensic work of the conservator's trade. The kind of thing a husband who paid attention would think to say. I understood now that he had not meant any of those things. I retrieved the lamp from its shelf and set it on the table. Then I went back upstairs, moving quietly past the kitchen where Brooke was on a call, her voice carrying the easy rhythm of someone who had no idea what was happening 2 floors below her. I opened the safe, turned the dial through the combination I had carried in my hands for 40 years, and took out the will. The copy of Thomas's will had lived in that safe for as long as I could remember, the working copy as our attorney had called it when we had the document drawn up. Kept at home for reference while the original remained in the firm's files. I had looked at it twice in the past 20 years, both times for routine reasons, both times without incident. I carried it downstairs as carefully as I carried everything in this room. Paper is patient. Paper waits. Under the work table lamp, the document looked entirely ordinary. 12 pages, standard legal formatting. The same clean typescript I remembered from the afternoon we had sat at a long table in a downtown law office and signed our names to a future we believed we understood. I read through it slowly, page by page, looking at it the way I looked at everything in this room, not with impatience, not with a conclusion already formed, but with the attention of someone who has learned over decades of close work that a document will tell you what it knows if you are willing to sit with it long enough. Nothing. Under the visible spectrum lamp, nothing. I set it flat on the center of the table and reached for the UV lamp, turned it on, held it 6 inches above page 3. The fluorescence was immediate. A broad, irregular patch glowed faint blue-white in the section governing the distribution of primary assets, the characteristic signature of chemical erasure, the residue that remains when someone removes ink from paper without understanding or without caring that the paper itself remembers. The area covered 3 lines of text. Beneath the glow, barely legible but present, I could make out the ghost of the original language, my name, the beneficiary designation we had agreed upon together, the percentage allocation Thomas and I had settled on a decade and a half ago, with the deliberate care of 2 people who had worked hard for what they had and intended to protect it. Over it, printed in ink that showed no fluorescence because it was simply newer, different language had been placed. Nathan's name, a 100% distribution. I set the lamp down. I had spent 32 years processing fraudulent documents. I had sat across conference tables from people who had altered contracts with considerable skill, who had manufactured paper trails that took months to unravel. A forged will produced on a home printer with a bottle of chemical eraser, and a careful hand was not by any standard. I had worked against sophisticated work. It was the kind of forgery that passes when no one is looking closely, when the person reviewing the document is assumed to be grieving, confused, unlikely to reach for a lamp. What made me set the UV lamp down and stand very still was not the erasure. It was the margin. A small notation barely a 1/4 inch tall in handwriting I would have recognized in the dark. A date written there perhaps as a record, perhaps as a reminder, the kind of habit a careful man develops when he is managing multiple timelines and needs to keep them straight. 14 months ago. Thomas had still been alive 14 months ago. He had still been coming down every morning to make coffee. He had still been sitting in his chair in the library with the paper folded to the crossword, asking me questions he already knew the answers to because he liked to hear me think out loud. He had still been here in this house, in this life, while Nathan had been in this same house, in this same life, quietly dismantling the legal foundation of everything we had spent 40 years building together. I stood with that for a longer moment than I usually permit myself to stand with anything. Then I turned the document over and continued working, because assumptions are the thing that gets you in the end, and I had learned too many years ago to stop at the first finding. I checked every remaining page. I held the lamp at each section. I read what was visible and what was not. The last page held nothing under the ultraviolet light. Only the signatures in their proper places, the notary seal the date of original execution. The unaltered record of a day when everything was still what it appeared to be. And then in the lower right corner of that final page in pencil, so faint that I had to angle the lamp and tilt my head to read it 2 lines in Thomas's hand. Not erased, not hidden, simply small, and placed where no one would look unless they were already looking for something. Harold Webb, 412 Mercer Street, the same name from the index card, the same address. A second path to the same destination written here as insurance left by a man who had understood long before I did that one copy of anything is never enough. That the person who loves you most will sometimes protect you in ways you cannot see until you need them. That redundancy in the hands of someone who is paying attention is not caution, it is love. I had driven past the 400 block of Mercer Street more times than I could count. It was a route I took on the way to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, a narrow corridor of mixed-use buildings between a dry cleaner and a wine shop, the kind of block that exists in every older neighborhood in Seattle, unremarkable, in the way that useful things often are easy to pass without registering. I had never noticed the number 412. I had never had reason to. Thomas had been here, every few Saturdays apparently for the better part of a year. I had thought he was fishing. He had mentioned it often enough: Puget Sound, the early morning light on the water, the particular peace of sitting in a boat with nothing required of you. I had never questioned it because it was so entirely like him, that kind of quiet, chosen solitude. He had always needed an hour of silence for every 3 hours of other people. I had loved him for 36 years in part because I understood that about him, and he had never had to explain it. He had not been fishing. Or perhaps he had been fishing some of those Saturdays, and I would never know which ones. Either way, some of those mornings had brought him here instead to a second-floor office above a wine shop on a block I had never looked at closely enough. I found a parking space half a block down and sat for a moment with the engine off, listening to the rain on the roof. Then I got out and went upstairs. The door at the top of the stairs read Harold R. Webb, Attorney at Law, in plain black lettering on frosted glass. No firm name. No list of practice areas. The kind of sign that belongs to a man who has practiced long enough that he no longer needs to advertise what he does. I knocked, and a voice told me to come in. The office was small and densely lined with bookshelves, not the decorative kind with matching spines arranged for visual effect, but working shelves, the kind that hold more than they were designed to and show it. Harold Webb was seated behind a desk that was similarly functional, covered in organized stacks that suggested a system only he fully understood. He was perhaps 70, with close-cropped gray hair and the unhurried manner of a man who had learned long ago that most things resolve themselves if you give them enough patience. He stood when I came in, extended his hand. Mrs. Calloway. Not a question. He had been expecting me or expecting someone who looked like me. I'm glad you came. Please sit down. I sat. He sat. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at me with the quiet attention of a man who understood that some conversations should not be rushed into. How long did you know him? I asked. 14 months, he said. He found me through a referral from a colleague of yours, actually. Someone you'd worked with at the IRS years ago. He wanted someone with no prior connection to the family. That was Thomas. Clean lines, no overlap, no ambiguity. Harold opened the lower drawer of his desk and produced a large envelope, legal size, sealed with Thomas's name on the return line and Harold's office address on the front. He set it between us on the desk and did not open it. He came to me in March of 2022, Harold said. He had already been watching the account activity for several months at that point. He wanted the will revised and properly executed before he did anything else. He said, Harold paused, choosing his words with the care of a man who had been holding them for some time. He said he wanted to make sure that whatever happened to him, the situation would be recoverable. His word, recoverable. He slid the envelope across the desk. I opened it carefully the way I opened everything, without hurrying, without assuming I already knew what I would find. The will inside was 12 pages identical in structure to the copy in my safe at home, with one significant difference. In the section governing primary asset distribution, my name appeared where it had always appeared in the language Thomas and I had agreed on together. Nathan's name was not present, not as a primary beneficiary, not as a contingent, not in any capacity that conveyed what Nathan believed had already been conveyed to him. I read it through twice. He revised it completely, I said. He did. Executed with 2 independent witnesses and a notary public on March 14th of 2022. It supersedes all prior versions. Harold paused. The copy in your home safe predates this document. Whatever that copy currently says, it has no legal standing. I set the will down on the desk and looked at the window for a moment. The rain had eased to a mist. On the street below, a woman walked a dog with single-minded purpose, indifferent to the weather. I thought about Nathan at the breakfast table, the blazer, the folder, the pen set down with such careful precision. He had been presenting a document that had already been superseded. He had been asking me to sign away a house he had no legal claim to on the basis of a will he had altered, not knowing that a second will existed in a room he had never been inside. Harold reached into his desk again. He left one more thing. He set a small white envelope on the desk beside the will, plain unsealed, slightly worn at the edges in the way of something that has been handled and set down and picked up again many times. On the front, in Thomas's handwriting, "For Marge. When you're ready." "He recorded something for you," Harold said quietly. "He told me you'd know when to watch it." I picked up the envelope. Inside, nestled in a fold of paper, was a USB drive. Small, black, unremarkable, the kind you find in a desk drawer in any house in America. I turned it over once in my fingers. Thomas's voice was in there somewhere. His face, possibly. Whatever he had decided in the end that he needed to say to me directly, I was not ready for it yet. Not in a lawyer's office on a rainy Tuesday morning with Harold Webb watching me with his patient, careful eyes. I folded the paper back around the drive and put the envelope in my coat pocket. "Thank you," I said. Harold nodded as if thanks were beside the point, which for him they probably were. I shook his hand and went back down the stairs to the street where the mist had softened everything at the edges, and the drive home felt both longer and shorter than it should have. Nathan had left a note on the kitchen counter. "Gone to the 7 o'clock showing with Brooke. Back by 10. There's soup on the stove if you're hungry. N." I read it once, set it back down, and stood in the kitchen for a moment listening to the house. Rain against the windows, the refrigerator cycling on. The particular silence of rooms that have been recently vacated still carrying the warmth of the people who just left. For the first time since the funeral, the house was mine. I turned off the soup. I had no interest in anything Nathan had prepared for me not tonight, and went to the library and closed the door. There is a version of grief that looks like stillness from the outside and is something else entirely on the inside. I'd been performing that version for 3 days now, and I was tired of it. In the specific way you grow tired of a role you are playing. Well, not because it is difficult, but because competence at a thing you should not have to do is its own particular exhaustion. In the library alone, I sat down at the writing desk and allowed myself to simply be Margaret Calloway for a while. Retired IRS criminal investigator, 32 years of financial crimes, tax fraud, money laundering, document forgery. Wife of a man who had, it turned out, been quietly building a federal case from his home office on Saturday afternoons while I thought he was fishing. Mother of a son who had apparently decided sometime in the last 3 years that the most efficient path to his financial problems ran directly through his parents' savings account. I took out a clean legal pad, uncapped the pen Thomas had given me 20 years ago, a good pen, the kind that writes whether or not you want it to, and wrote across the top of the first page, "What I have." An early supervisor of mine at the IRS, a woman who had broken more financial crime cases than anyone else in the Seattle field office before she retired in 1998, had said something to me during my first major investigation that I had never entirely put down. "Never move until you can prove every single step, Margaret. Not most of them, every single one." She had said it after I had come to her, certain I had found the thing, the transaction, the account, the name that tied everything together. She had looked at my work for 4 minutes without speaking, then looked up and said those words, and sent me back to find 2 more months of documentation before she would let me take it upstairs. She had been right. She was always right. The case had held. I wrote for 20 minutes without stopping. When I set the pen down, the legal pad held 7 items, each one numbered. Each one accompanied by a notation about its current state and what would be needed to make it useful in a formal proceeding. 136 months of bank statements from our joint savings account documenting systematic withdrawals totaling $186,000. In hand, source Thomas's files. 2. The business registration for Cascade Valley Property Solutions, LLC in Oregon, registered to Dale R. Pruitt, formed 4 months before the first withdrawal. Confirmed via public record. Printout needed. 3. The altered copy of Thomas's will currently in my safe. Chemical erasure visible under UV. Original language recoverable. Physical evidence in hand. 4. The original will executed March 14, 2022, held by Harold Webb, legally superseding all prior versions. Confirmed. Copy in hand. 5. The gap between items 3 and 4, the same document, into materially different versions, one of which had been presented to a county probate process under Nathan's direction. That differential was not a clerical matter, it was a crime. 6. Nathan's handwritten date notation in the margin of the altered copy, placed there 14 months ago while Thomas was still alive. Establishing premeditation. 7A USB drive containing an unknown quantity of additional documentation assembled by Thomas Calloway over 14 months, currently sealed origin, verified by Harold Webb. I looked at the list for a long time. 7 points, each one a thread. Pulled together correctly, they described something that had a name, several names in fact, depending on which statute you were reading from. Wire fraud, forgery of a legal instrument, attempted theft by deception. I had not assembled a case like this in 4 years, but the capacity for it does not leave you the way other things leave you. It sits in the architecture of how you think present, whether you are using it or not. Thomas, I thought. You did half the work already. I made 2 calls before 9 o'clock. The first was to a number I found in the back of an address book I kept in the desk drawer, a book of professional contacts I had maintained throughout my career and not thrown away when I retired, because I had learned that the people in it were the kind you eventually needed again. Ray Kowalski had been a licensed private investigator in the Seattle metro area for 19 years. I had referred cases to him twice during my time at the IRS Financial Background Work Asset, tracing the kind of careful, documented digging that courts found credible. He answered on the 3rd ring and listened without interrupting while I explained what I needed. He quoted me a retainer and a preliminary timeline and said he could start Monday. The second call was to a number Harold Webb had written on the back of his business card before I left his office. Sandra Okafor had been a civil litigation attorney in Seattle for 16 years, with a focus on financial fraud and estate disputes. Harold had described her in 2 sentences, which was his way economical accurate. She's careful and she's fast. Tell her I sent you. Sandra answered her own phone. She listened the way lawyers listen, without filling the silence, without reassurance, just attention and the occasional precise question. When I finished, she said she could see me Thursday morning and asked me to bring whatever documentation I currently had in hand. I said I would. After I hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet library with the rain coming down outside and the legal pad in front of me and the lamp making its small, careful circle of light. The USB drive sat at the corner of the desk where I had placed it when I came home, small and black and patient the way objects are patient when they are waiting for the person who needs them to be ready. I was not ready. Not tonight. Tonight I had done what needed doing, the list, the calls, the first careful steps of something that would require every bit of precision I had left. Thomas's voice could wait one more night. I turned off the lamp and went upstairs. Sleep had not come. I had lain in the dark for 2 hours listening to the rain shift from heavy to steady to heavy again. And at some point after 2 in the morning, I stopped pretending it would arrive and got up. Not with the defeated feeling of insomnia, but with the particular quiet resolution of a person who has accepted that there is something unfinished and the only way forward is through it. I went downstairs to the workshop. Thomas had bought the laptop in the spring of 2019, a plain gray machine he had carried down to the workshop himself and set on the corner of the far bench without ceremony. For your research, Marge. Keep it down here. I had thanked him and assumed he meant what it sounded like, a dedicated machine for the conservation work, away from the household computer upstairs with its shared calendars and accumulated clutter. I had used it for exactly that for 4 years. I understood now that he had meant something more deliberate. He had wanted me to have a machine that was mine alone in a room that was mine alone, on a network connection that ran through a separate router he had installed in the workshop without explaining why. Thomas never did anything without a reason. He simply did not always share the reason at the time. I sat down on the stool and plugged the USB into the port on the left side. The drive contained 11 files. The first 8 were documentation, the same careful assembly I had come to expect from a man who had spent 40 years making sure the numbers balanced before he closed the books for the night. Bank statements, some overlapping with Thomas's paper files and some extending further. A transaction log he had maintained himself month by month, cross-referencing withdrawal dates against our account records with the notations of an accountant who trusted his own system more than anyone else's. Then 3 email exchanges saved as PDFs. I opened the first one. The address in the sender field was Nathan's personal account. The recipient was a domain I did not recognize, but the name attached to it was Dale Pruitt. The date was 14 months ago, the same month Nathan had altered the will, the same month Thomas had apparently understood what he was dealing with. At the bottom of the email thread, a single line from Nathan: "Use the desktop this afternoon, forgot to log out. Delete this thread when you're done." He had used the family desktop. Left his email open in the browser. Thomas had found it, read it, and saved it to a PDF, without opening a reply, without touching anything, without leaving any trace that he had ever seen it. 40 years of accounting had taught Thomas Calloway that the most important thing you could do with evidence was preserve it exactly as you found it. I read through all 3 email threads. The language was careful. Nathan had been cautious about what he committed to writing. But the pattern was legible to someone who had spent 3 decades reading financial correspondence for concealed intent, references to the timeline, to moving the second tranche, to making sure the paperwork is clean before Q1. Her appearing without a name in 2 separate messages, used as a pronoun the way you use a pronoun when you have agreed not to use the name. Her, me, his mother. I set the 3rd PDF aside and opened the 9th file. It was a video. Thomas was sitting at the desk in his home office, the one upstairs, the one I had not been able to go into since March. He was wearing the blue flannel shirt I had given him 2 Christmases ago, and he needed a haircut. Which meant he had filmed this sometime in the last year of his life, when the quarterly IRS deadlines were keeping him too busy to remember ordinary things like haircuts. He looked directly at the camera and did not look away. Marge. He said my name the way he had always said it, 2 syllables the second one, carrying just enough weight to mean something. If you're watching this, then things went the way I thought they might. I want you to know I considered telling you sooner. I considered it every week for 14 months. He paused. Outside in the rain, something moved against the workshop window, a branch probably in the wind. I tried talking to him once, sat him down, told him I knew about the account. Didn't show him the documentation, just told him I knew. Another pause, shorter. The next morning, he moved $40,000 to an account in Oregon I'd never seen before. Transferred it out of the investment fund we'd held since '98. Gone in one transaction. That's when I understood. If I pushed him, he'd run. He'd move everything he could reach to places I couldn't trace fast enough, and by the time anyone could act on it, there'd be nothing recoverable. He used the same word Harold had used. Recoverable. So I waited. I documented everything he did instead of stopping him, because stopping him would have scattered the evidence. I built the case instead. He looked at the camera for a moment without speaking. I built it for you. You'll know what to do with it. You always knew what to do with things like this. I just never thought you'd have to do it with something like this. A breath. Finish it, Marge, and then be done with it. Don't carry it longer than you have to. I love you. I always did. The recording ended. The screen went dark. I sat with my hands flat on the workbench and looked at the black rectangle where his face had been. There was nothing I needed to say. There was no one to say it to. I had learned long ago that grief does not require an audience, and that the things you most need to feel, you generally need to feel alone in the dark without anyone watching. I gave myself 4 minutes. I counted them on the workshop clock. Then I closed the video file, ejected the USB, and put it in the inside pocket of my robe. The stair creaked. The 3rd step from the bottom, the one that had announced every late-night trip to the kitchen for 40 years, the one Thomas had threatened to fix every winter and never quite gotten to. 1 footstep, then a pause, then nothing. Someone was standing on the stairs. I closed the laptop. Reached for the botanical atlas I had left on the far end of the bench, the 19th century one, the one I had been working on since spring. Opened it to a page near the middle. Adjusted the lamp. Set my face into the slightly distracted expression of a woman absorbed in something she finds genuinely interesting. A woman for whom 2 in the morning is simply when the house is quiet enough to work. The workshop door opened 4 inches. Nathan's face appeared in the gap. He looked at me, then at the book, then at me again. He was in a t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair flattened on one side. "Mom, it's 2 in the morning." "I know, sweetheart." I turned a page without looking up. I couldn't sleep. I find the work settles me. A beat of silence. Then, "Okay, don't stay up too late." The door closed. His footsteps went back up the stairs. I counted them until I heard the bedroom door. Then I turned the page again and read nothing, and waited for my heart to finish doing what hearts do when they have just been asked to perform under pressure. Before I reveal what Margaret does next, drop a comment with the number 9 so I know you're still here with me. She's been watching, waiting, and building something Nathan never saw coming. And just when he thinks he's already won, that's exactly when she moves. A note, this story contains some fictional elements shaped for entertainment and educational purposes. If that's not for you, it's completely fine to step away now. 3 days had passed. I had met with Sandra Okafor on Thursday morning, a spare. Efficient woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped hair and reading glasses, she took on and off as she moved between documents and conversation. She had reviewed what I brought her without comment until she reached the altered will, at which point she set it flat on the table and looked at it for a long moment before asking 2 very precise questions. I answered both. She made notes. Before I left, I asked her about recording conversations in my own home. She told me Washington's consent law and its exceptions cited the relevant case precedent and said that given the documentary evidence I already had, any recording made in the common areas of my own residence would likely be considered admissible as corroborating evidence rather than primary proof. She said likely the way lawyers say it when they mean yes, but carefully. I had been careful. "Dale's coming for dinner," Nathan said over his shoulder as he came through the kitchen, not quite looking at me, already moving toward the refrigerator. "He's in town for a couple days. Thought it would be nice for you to meet him." "How nice?" I said. I waited until he had his back to me. Then I went to the hall table and opened the shallow drawer where I kept Thomas's old phone, the one I had charged and kept close since the night in the workshop. The one whose operating system I had spent a quiet Tuesday afternoon reacquainting myself with locating the voice memo application, testing the Bluetooth pairing with the small wireless earbuds I used for audiobooks. I carried the phone to the living room. The sofa faced the fireplace, a long, deep-cushioned piece Thomas and I had bought at an estate sale in Fremont 12 years ago. The kind of furniture that invites people to sit back and relax and say things they might not say in a harder chair. It had 2 large accent cushions at either end, the kind that exist primarily for visual balance and serve no practical purpose. I pressed record on the voice memo application, checked the level. Set the phone between the 2 cushions on the left end of the sofa screen down mic, facing up through the gap between the fabric. Invisible, unless you were looking for it and knew what you were looking for. Then I went upstairs. "I'm tired, Nathan," I called from the landing. "I think I'll lie down before your friend arrives. Don't worry about me for dinner." His voice came up from the kitchen, warm and immediately accommodating. "Of course, Mom. Rest. I'll check on you later." I closed the bedroom door, sat on the edge of the bed, put the small wireless earbuds in first, the right, then the left, and opened the Bluetooth connection to Thomas's phone 2 rooms below. There was a delay of perhaps 3 seconds, a soft crackle, and then I could hear the living room as clearly as if I were standing in it. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. The weather channel Nathan had turned on at low volume, the particular hollow sound of an empty room waiting to be used. I had told Ruth Haverford once that I found surveillance work uncomfortable early in my career, before I had learned to separate the discomfort from the necessity. She had looked at me over her reading glasses and said the thing I had carried with me ever since. The best investigators I ever knew could disappear in plain sight, Margaret. They weren't invisible. They were just somewhere no one thought to look. I lay back against the headboard and waited. Dale Pruitt arrived at 6:15. I heard the front door, the sound of a jacket being hung, 2 male voices doing the brief, performative catching up of men who have spoken recently by phone and have little new to report in person. Through the earbuds, I assembled him from sound alone, heavier footsteps than Nathan's, a laugh that came too quickly and too loudly, the kind of social reflex that compensates for something. They settled on the sofa. I heard the cushions shift. For 40 minutes, they talked about nothing that mattered, a property deal in Portland, a problem with a contractor, a game that had gone the wrong way the previous weekend. I listened without moving. This was the part of the work that required the most patience, the waiting through ordinary conversation, for the moment when the guard drops and the real conversation begins. It always came. People could not sustain performance indefinitely, especially people who believed they were unobserved. The shift came when Nathan refilled their glasses. "So where are we?" Dale's voice lower now, the social register gone. "She still hasn't signed." "She will. She just needs more time. You've seen how she gets. Confused. It takes her longer to process things." A pause. Ice shifting in a glass. "And after she signs, how long before we move her?" I did not move. 2 weeks, Nathan said. Maybe 3. The memory care facility in Bellevue has a room on hold. I put a deposit down in August. August, 2 months ago, 1 month before Thomas died. She's going to fight it. She won't know what she's signing until it's done. And by the time she figures it out, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The sentence finished itself in the silence that followed, in the way sentences do when the people speaking them already understand the ending. I lay in the dark bedroom with the earbuds in and my hands folded on my stomach and Thomas's phone recording everything 2 floors below. And I listened to my son explain the timeline for removing me from my own home. I did not cry. I had never cried while working. What I felt instead was something older and quieter, the settling of a thing into its final and permanent shape. The case was no longer a collection of documents and suspicions. It had a voice now. 2 voices, in fact, speaking plainly in my living room while they believed I was asleep upstairs. I reached over and turned off the bedside lamp. In the dark, I listened until they moved to the kitchen for dinner. Then I closed my eyes and for the first time in 4 days, slept. I was in the workshop by 6:45. Not because I had set an alarm, I had not, but because the particular quality of sleep that comes after 4 days without it tends to end cleanly without the usual reluctance. I had slept 5 hours and woken with the immediate alertness of someone whose mind had simply finished what it needed to do and was ready to continue. I made coffee in the small percolator I kept on the workshop shelf, the one Thomas had bought for the early mornings when he worked down here on tax season weekends, and I sat at the bench with the mug in both hands and looked at the light coming through the small window above the garden. The roses along the back fence were in their last weeks. By November, they would need cutting back. At 7 o'clock, I picked up my phone and called Sandra Okafor. There are calls you make with your pulse elevated, with the rehearsed sentences dissolving the moment the other person picks up. I had made enough of those in my career to know the difference. This was not that. This was a call I had been building toward for 9 days, with documentation and a clear objective, and a lawyer who already understood the architecture of what I was giving her. My voice was steady because there was nothing left to be afraid of discovering. I already knew what I had found. Sandra answered on the second ring. I spoke for 11 minutes. She asked 4 questions, each one targeted, none of them requiring more than 2 sentences to answer. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment in the way she had been quiet during our first meeting, not hesitating, just processing. "The recording from last night," she said. "Tell me again what was said about the memory care facility." I told her again. The deposit in August, the room on hold, 2 weeks, maybe 3. Another brief silence. "I'm going to contact someone at the FBI field office this morning," she said. "His name is Derek Strom. He handles financial crimes. I've worked with him twice before. What you have is well past the threshold for probable cause on federal wire fraud and document forgery. The asset freeze will require him to file an emergency affidavit with a magistrate judge, but given what you've described, I don't anticipate difficulty. How long? If he moves today, 48 hours, possibly less." I thanked her and ended the call. 32 years at the IRS had taught me the thing that most people learn too late about the legal system. It is not an obstacle. It is a mechanism precisely engineered, and like any mechanism, it responds predictably when you engage it correctly. The people who fear it are generally the ones who have never learned to read the operating manual. I refilled my coffee and went back upstairs to begin another ordinary day. The 48 hours that followed required the specific discipline of doing nothing visible, while everything moved beneath the surface. Nathan was attentive at breakfast on Friday, solicitous in the particular way of someone who has a timeline and is watching it carefully. He mentioned the trust documents twice, once obliquely, once more directly framing it as concern about my financial security in the coming months. I received both mentions with the same mild, slightly distracted gratitude I had been performing for weeks. He left for a showing in Kirkland by 9. Brooke stayed home, which required a different kind of performance, the low-maintenance kind, the woman who moves quietly through her own house and gives no one reason to look at her too closely. I spent the morning in the workshop and the afternoon reading in the library and said nothing that mattered to anyone. Sandra called at 4:15 on Saturday. The affidavit was filed Friday afternoon. The magistrate signed the order this morning. It covers the property at your address, the joint savings account, and 2 additional accounts registered in Nathan's name that Strom's office identified through the financial records you provided. The freeze is active as of 11 a.m. I set the book I had been pretending to read face down on the desk. And Strom. He wants to meet with you, early next week when you're ready. He said, a pause, and I thought I heard something close to dry amusement in Sandra's voice. He said the documentation is the cleanest preliminary package he's seen in a long time. Thomas, I thought. Thomas built it. I told Sandra I would be available Monday and thanked her and ended the call. Then I picked the book back up, found my page, and waited. The call came at 2:30 on Sunday afternoon. I heard Nathan's phone ring upstairs twice, and then his voice, initially the Sunday register of a man interrupted from something comfortable, and then a different register entirely, sharper. The controlled urgency of someone receiving information they have been dreading without entirely believing would arrive. His footsteps on the stairs were faster than usual. Mom! He appeared in the library doorway, still holding his phone jacket half on. His face had the particular color of someone whose blood has just done something abrupt. There's some kind of freeze on the house, on the accounts. The county recorder's office called they rejected my filing. Did you do something? Did you call someone? I looked up from the page. The book in my lap was a collection of regional botanical surveys from the 1890s, one I had owned for 20 years. The text small enough that it gave me a natural reason to look down at it rather than up at people who were speaking to me. I use this to my advantage now, the slow lift of the eyes, the slight recalibration of a woman pulling her attention back from somewhere else. A freeze, I said. On the house. On the accounts too. Nathan the Eye had papers at the recorder's office and he stopped himself reorganizing. Did you call anyone a lawyer? Someone from your old office? I spoke with Sandra earlier in the week. I said which was true and which said nothing. About some questions I had. She mentioned she might look into a few things. What things? I set the book aside with the careful movement of someone for whom setting a book aside is a considered action. Folded my hands in my lap, looked at my son. He was standing 3 feet inside the doorway with his jacket half on and his phone in his hand, and his eyes doing something I had not seen them do before in all the years I had been watching them. The warmth that lived there practiced reliable. The warmth that arrived on schedule and never quite reached the back of the eye was gone. What was underneath it was something harder and less comfortable, the thing that had always been there, and that I was seeing clearly for the first time. I'm sure Sandra will sort it out, I said. These things are confusing. I don't always understand the paperwork. A pause. He held my gaze and I held his, and in the 3 seconds that followed, I did one thing I had not done in front of him since June. I allowed the corners of my mouth to move. Not a smile exactly, the shadow of one. The kind that could mean anything or nothing, depending on what you already knew. Are you all right, Nathan? I asked. You look pale. He stood there for a moment longer. Then he turned and went back upstairs without another word. I listened to his footsteps cross the ceiling above me, heard the bedroom door close, heard the low, urgent murmur of a phone call beginning. I picked up the botanical survey and found my page. Outside, the last of the afternoon light was going off the roses. The cafe near Pike Place Market smelled of dark roast and wet wool. I arrived 7 minutes early. Ray Kowalski was already there. He had chosen a corner table facing the door with his back to the wall. Old habit. I recognized it immediately because I had the same one. He stood when I approached. He didn't have to. Tall mid-50s with the kind of face that had absorbed too many hard stories without letting any of them show. Ray had spent 19 years in private investigation, the last 6, consulting on financial fraud cases for attorneys across the Pacific Northwest. I had found his name in my old IRS contact directory beside a note I'd written in red ink thorough. Patient. Doesn't talk too much. The waitress brought coffee without asking. He had ordered ahead. It was a small thing, but I noticed it. He had thought about what I might need before I arrived. "You look like you slept," he said. I didn't. He nodded as if that was the correct answer. I laid out what I had brought, a 2-page evidence summary typed single-spaced. Ray read it without interrupting. When he finished, he set the pages face down on the table between us and picked up his cup. "Tell me what you want to happen next," he said. I told him about the insurance. Thomas had carried a whole life policy through Pacific Northwest Mutual, $45,000 paid out the week after the funeral. It was mine, every cent of it cleanly documented. I had not touched it. I had been waiting. Ray listened. He had a way of being still that I had rarely encountered, not passive, not distracted, simply entirely present without making a performance of it. 32 years at the IRS had taught me that quality was uncommon. Most people listen while preparing their next sentence. Ray listened as though the next sentence could wait indefinitely. "I want to open a separate account," I said. "Something Nathan doesn't know about, until I decide to let him find it." "Walk me through that." "He believes I'm confused," I said. "He believes I'm the kind of woman who leaves papers on desks without knowing why. I want to use that." Rain moved in slow gray sheets across the window beside us. Someone at the counter laughed at something on their phone. The cafe held the smell of other people's mornings of lives proceeding normally around ours. "The account is legitimate," I continued. "The money is mine. There's no entrapment issue if I simply own something and leave the statement where it can be seen." "Correct," Ray said. "As long as you don't instruct the bank to contact him or specifically induce him to act, you're not engineering a trap in any legal sense. You're just being careless." He paused one beat. "Deliberately." I had said something close to that over the years in different rooms to younger investigators who were impatient to move. The best trap is one the target builds himself. I didn't say it aloud now. It didn't need to be said. Ray had almost certainly arrived at the same conclusion before I did. "What does the bank do with incoming calls about the account?" I asked. He set his cup down. "Pacific Northwest Mutual, like any FDIC-regulated institution, records all inbound and outbound calls for compliance purposes. Customers are notified at account opening. That notification satisfies Washington State's 2-party consent requirement. If Nathan calls to ask about transfer procedures, that call is recorded automatically legally and held in their system. And you would know if he called, 'I have a contact in their fraud prevention department,'" Ray said. "Former client. She can't share account details, but she can confirm whether a specific phone number placed an inquiry call. That's all I'd ask." It was enough. That afternoon, I opened the account at a Pacific Northwest Mutual branch on 3rd Avenue. The banker was perhaps 26, careful with his words, in the way young professionals are when they want to seem experienced. I signed the paperwork with Thomas's old fountain pen, the one he'd carried for 20 years and kept in the top drawer of his desk. The $45,000 settled into an account registered solely to Margaret Ann Calloway. Paper statements, standard mail delivery. I came home to Nathan's car in the driveway and the sound of Brooke in the kitchen. I said good evening to both of them, filled a glass of water, and went to the library. I sat at Thomas's desk for a while. October light came flat through the side window, more honest than summer, somehow less forgiving. I thought about the weight of the pen in my hand at the bank, how it had always been Thomas's and was now entirely mine. I thought about the 4 minutes I had spent in the workshop watching his face on a small screen. I thought about the word finish. Then I placed the bank statement on the corner of the reading table, half beneath a book on Pacific Coast geology, the way a distracted woman might set something down and forget to put it away. I turned off the lamp. I left the door open 3 inches. I went upstairs. At 9:47, I heard the library door open below. I knew Nathan's walk by then, the slight drag of his right heel on hardwood, unhurried and certain the walk of a man who believes he is moving through a house that already belongs to him. A pause. Silence for what I counted as 30 seconds. Then the soft sound of paper placed carefully back against a flat surface. Footsteps retreating. The door pulled to, but not fully closed. He had left the statement exactly where he found it. I lay in the dark and did not sleep. At 6:12 the following morning, my phone lit up on the nightstand. A message from Ray, 4 lines, no greeting. He called the bank at 9:07 this morning, asked about wire transfer procedures for a joint account conversion. They recorded everything. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Thomas used to say when a case was going well and he could feel me drawing breath to say something, "Don't celebrate, Marge. Just keep working." I got up. I made coffee. I kept working. The house was quiet in the way it only gets when Nathan is genuinely gone, not just in another room, not just upstairs, but out the door with his car keys and his particular brand of loud absence removed entirely from the air. Brooke had left an hour earlier with a shopping bag over one arm and a brief word about dinner. I had nodded and gone to the library. I sat at Thomas's desk with the laptop open and a cup of tea going cold beside me. In 32 years at the IRS, I had learned one thing about conspiracies that held more reliably than almost anything else. The weakest link in any chain is never the plan itself. It is always the second person, the one who agreed, who went along, who told himself it was temporary or practical, or that he had no real choice. That person lives with a specific kind of fear, not the fear of being caught, but the fear of being abandoned when the moment comes. And that fear left alone long enough in a quiet room will do the work for you. Dale Pruitt had been living with that fear for 3 years. Sandra had obtained the email access through proper legal channels, a court-ordered disclosure narrow in scope. Limited to correspondence between Nathan Calloway and a registered agent of Cascade Valley Property Solutions, LLC, during the period covered by the asset freeze affidavit. Agent Strom had signed off on the parameters. Everything Ray forwarded to me had passed through Sandra's hands first. I had not touched anything I was not permitted to touch. The email I was looking at was from Nathan to Dale, dated 8 months ago. The subject line read, "Revised Timeline." The body was brief and precise in the way Nathan was always precise when he believed no one was watching. If the old man doesn't cooperate by Q2, we accelerate. The property alone covers what you owe me. She won't fight it. She's already forgetting things. She. He had not used my name. Just she. I read it twice. Then I opened a new message and typed 4 lines. Dale, I came across something I think you should see. Nathan sent this to you in March. I'm wondering if he told you the same thing he told me. Is this what he promised you too? I attached the email. I hit send. Then I sat back and waited. The rain had been steady all evening, the kind that arrives in November and seems to have no intention of leaving. I could hear it against the single library window light and persistent, and beneath it the faint tick of the old mantel clock Thomas had brought back from an estate sale in Tacoma 15 years ago. I had never particularly liked that clock. I liked it now. 40 minutes passed, then 50. I refilled the tea and did not drink it. At the 53rd minute, my phone rang. An Oregon area code I did not recognize. I answered. The voice on the other end was tight and slightly too fast, the voice of a man who's been sitting with a decision for the better part of an hour and has finally made it. Mrs. Calloway, this is Dale Pruitt. Hello, Dale. A pause. How did you get that email? Through legal channels, I said. Would you like to discuss it? Another pause longer. I need to know, are you recording this? People betray each other. I had told younger investigators over the years when they believe they've already been betrayed first. The trick was simply to let the belief arrive on its own. "I'm not recording this call," I said, "but I think you already know what Nathan wrote about you in the emails I haven't sent you yet." The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. In IRS work, 4 seconds of silence from a subject is a very long time. "I can be there in 2 hours, Dale said. He arrived in 90 minutes. I met him at the front door. He was shorter than I had imagined, from the voice on Nathan's phone, mid-40s, broad through the shoulders, with the look of a man who had spent years being physically capable and recently had that confidence replaced by something quieter and less comfortable. He was carrying a canvas messenger bag against his side, the way people carry things they are not sure they should have brought. I brought him to the library. I did not offer tea. He sat across the desk and put the bag on the floor beside his chair. He looked at the bookshelves for a moment, then at me. He told me it was her money, too," Dale said. "That it was a family restructuring, that you had agreed." He stopped. "I should have asked you directly." "You should have," I said. "He owes me $60,000, Dale said, "from a deal in 2019 that went bad. This was how he was paying it back. I kept the books for Cascade Valley. I moved the money when he told me to, and I told myself it was a debt settlement." He looked at the bag. "I kept copies of everything, every transfer, every instruction he sent me, 3 years of it." He reached down and placed the bag on the desk between us. His hands were not steady. "I want immunity," he said. "I'll give you everything." I looked at the bag. Then I looked at Dale Pruitt, who had driven 90 minutes through November rain to sit across from a 70-year-old woman in a library and ask for a mercy he understood she was not authorized to grant. "That's not my decision to make," I said, "but I know someone who can help." I picked up my phone and called Agent Strom. Strom arrived within the hour. He and Dale spoke in the front room while I remained in the library. I could hear the low register of their voices, but not the words. At 10:45, Strom knocked on the library door, told me Dale would come in the following morning to give a formal statement, and thanked me for the call. Dale left without coming back to say goodbye. I did not expect him to. When the front door closed, I unzipped the canvas bag. The files were organized, which surprised me, labeled by month paper-clipped, in sequence, the kind of meticulous record-keeping that belongs to a man who knew, even as he was doing something wrong, that he might one day need to prove exactly what he had done and on whose instruction. I lifted the first document from the top. It was an email. Nathan to Dale, dated February 2021. Thomas had still been alive in February 2021. I read the subject line, "Long-term plan begin phase 1. I read the first paragraph. Then I set the paper down on the desk and did not pick it up again. The mantel clock ticked. The rain continued. Somewhere in the house, a pipe shifted and settled in the cold. Nathan had not begun stealing when his father became ill. He had not begun stealing when grief made the family vulnerable. He had built the plan while Thomas was still here, while Thomas was still sitting at this desk, still carrying that pen, still calling me Marge in the particular way he had for 40 years. I had known Nathan was calculating. I had not known he was that patient. I sat with the paper for a long time. I had prepared the page on Wednesday evening, 3 days before Nathan told me he had arranged a notary. That was the part he never understood about me. He planned 2 days ahead. I planned for the conversation that had not happened yet. Sandra had reviewed Nathan's full trust document during the asset freeze proceedings. That was how I knew its structure down to the margin width and the line spacing. Ray had photographed every page the afternoon Nathan left the folder on the kitchen counter in early October, back when Nathan still believed I would simply sign whatever was placed in front of me. I had the layout. I had the exact language. I had sourced the same 24-pound white bond paper from the hall closet where Nathan kept his printer supplies 3 weeks after he moved in. The only difference between my page 3 and his page 3 was a single word. His read, "This trust shall be irrevocable upon execution." Mine read, "This trust shall be revocable upon execution." I printed it in the workshop at 11 at night on Thomas's old laser printer. I held both pages under the overhead light for a long time, comparing them the way I used to compare financial statements, not looking for what was there, but for anything that should not be. The margins matched. The font matched Times New Roman 12-point justified. The footer sat in the same position at the bottom right. The page number was correct. The paragraph breaks fell on identical lines. I folded my page 3 once and slid it inside a copy of the Pacific Navigator's Handbook that had lived on the library shelf since Thomas bought it at an estate sale in 2004. I put the book back in its place and went to bed. On Friday morning, Nathan mentioned over coffee that the notary would come Saturday at 2 o'clock. Very convenient, he said, just to get everything finalized. That's very thoughtful of you, Nathan, I said. He was pleased. He had the particular ease of a man who believes the difficult part is already behind him. Saturday arrived gray and cold. Nathan had placed his folder, the complete trust document, tabbed and ready on the library table by noon. He was dressed well. Brooke had straightened the living room and set out a small tray with cups and a French press. Everything was arranged the way Nathan arranged things when he wanted a room to feel professional and reassuring at the same time. I sat in the armchair near the window with the Pacific Navigator's Handbook open in my lap. I was not reading it. At 1:55, the doorbell rang. Nathan moved toward the front door immediately. As he passed the library table, his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He glanced at it. I saw the flicker of recognition cross his face, and without thinking, he turned and held the folder out to me. "Hold this 1 second, Mom." Then he stepped into the hallway answering the call as he went, his voice dropping to the low-taut register he used when something needed managing. I held the folder. Brooke had gone to the kitchen to bring the French press. The hallway was visible from where I sat, and I could hear Nathan at the front door, one hand on the latch, speaking quietly into his phone, with his back half turned. I had perhaps 15 seconds. I opened the folder to page 3. I lifted the page I had prepared from inside the back cover of the book in my lap and placed it on top. I removed Nathan's page 3 from beneath it and slid it inside the book in a single motion, closed the book, and set it on the side table beside my chair. The whole movement took less time than it takes to describe. My hands have separated the fused pages of a water-damaged atlas from 1887. They have re-adhered spine cloth on a binding that had been deteriorating for 60 years. They do not shake when precision is required. They never have. I closed the folder and rested it on my knee. Nathan opened the front door. Carol Eames stepped in mid-50s, composed with a document case and the particular efficiency of someone who processes several signings a week and has learned not to waste time on pleasantries. Nathan thanked her for coming and led her to the library table. Brooke appeared with the tray. Carol set out her materials and accepted a cup of coffee. She picked up the folder and conducted her standard preliminary check, confirming that the document was complete, that signature and initial lines were correctly marked, that the notarial certificate at the back matched the document type. In Washington State, a notary public certifies the identity of the signer and confirms that the act of signing is voluntary and uncoerced. She is not required to read or verify the substance of the document. That is the responsibility of the parties and their legal counsel. Carol had no prior version of this document to compare against. Nathan signed each page where indicated, initialed where required. Carol applied her embossed seal and her signature to the notarial certificate. The process took 9 minutes. When it was finished, Nathan picked up the document and turned through it, the way a person turns through something they have already decided is correct quickly, confirming presence of pages rather than reading them. He reached the end, squared the pages against the table, and nodded. Perfect. He extended his hand to me. I stood and shook it. Take care of it, Nathan, I said. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just closed something he had been working toward for a long time. Brooke showed Carol out. Nathan put the document in his briefcase, said he had an errand before 4 o'clock, and kissed me briefly on the cheek. The kiss of someone who has already moved on to the next item on his list. I stood at the living room window and watched his car pull out of the driveway and turn north. He would not read it again. In 32 years of financial investigation, I had watched careful, intelligent people ruin themselves with exactly that confidence, the certainty that arrives at the end of a long effort and feels indistinguishable from safety. They stop checking the details because the details feel settled. They move quickly because speed feels like winning. Nathan had just signed a revocable trust. Every asset it named could be unwound with a single motion filed in county court. Sandra already had the paperwork drafted. He would not discover that until he tried to use what he believed he had secured. And by then, the recording from the bank Dale's files the forged will submitted to probate court, and Thomas's 3 years of documented evidence would all be waiting for him in the same room. I let the curtain fall. I went back to the library, sat down at Thomas's desk, and picked up the Pacific Navigator's Handbook. I removed Nathan's original page 3 from inside the back cover and placed it in the manila envelope Sandra had labeled Exhibit F. Then I sealed it. The federal building on 2nd Avenue looks the same in December, as it does in every other month, gray stone revolving doors that never quite warm up. The particular smell of recycled air and floor polish that I have associated with serious work for most of my adult life. I had walked through those doors more times than I could count in 32 years. I knew which security officer worked Mondays, which elevator ran slow, which vending machine on the 4th floor had not worked correctly since the second Obama administration. This morning I carried a document case and a visitor badge instead of a federal credentials card. I had not minded retiring in 2019. The work had been good, but the paperwork had grown heavier each year, and Thomas had plans Portugal in the spring, a long drive down the Oregon coast mornings without an alarm. We had done most of it, not all of it. On my last day, my supervisor, Bill Cranston, had shaken my hand in the hallway and said he hoped I would enjoy the quiet. I had told him that retirement just meant I got to choose which cases to take. He had laughed. He thought I was joking. I had not entirely been joking. I simply had not known yet which case it would be. The elevator to the 4th floor still ran slow. Agent Derek Stream met me at the reception desk himself, which told me he had been waiting. He was a careful man, not cautious in the way of someone uncertain, but cautious in the way of someone who had learned that most mistakes happen in the last 10% of a case, when everyone assumes the outcome is already settled. He shook my hand and led me to his office without small talk, which I appreciated. The office had a window that looked out over Elliott Bay. The water was flat and silver under the December overcast. A container ship was moving slowly toward the sound patient, an enormous indifferent to everything on shore. I placed the document case on the desk and opened it. There are 4 sections, I said. The first is the financial record, 36 months of bank statements, showing the pattern of withdrawals, the amounts, and the timing relative to Cascade Valley Property Solutions, LLC's registration date. The second is the corporate record Dale Pruitt's files confirming his role as registered agent and the movement of funds through the shell structure. The third is the probate record the forged will Nathan filed with the county alongside the original executed by Thomas in March 2022 and held by Harold Webb. The fourth is the audio record, the recording from September, in which Nathan and Dale discuss relocating me to a memory care facility and the timeline for asset transfer. I set the USB from Thomas beside the case. This is supplementary. Thomas documented his own observations over 3 years. It is admissible as a contemporaneous personal record. Strom sat down and began reading. I had brought nothing to do while I waited because I did not intend to be distracted. I sat in the chair across from him and looked at the bay. The container ship had made almost no visible progress. I watched it anyway. Strom read for 40 minutes without speaking. He turned pages the way experienced investigators turn pages, not quickly, not slowly, but with the specific rhythm of someone cross-referencing as they go, building the structure in their mind in real time. Twice he went back to an earlier section. Once he stopped and wrote something on a notepad without looking up. When he finished, he closed the last folder and set it squarely on top of the others. "Wire fraud," he said. The electronic transfers through Cascade Valley, each one, constitutes a separate count under 18 U.S.C. 1343. Document forgery filing an altered will is a state felony, but because it facilitates the interstate wire fraud, the U.S. Attorney's Office is absorbing it into the federal indictment. And the income flowing through the LLC was never reported. Mr. Calloway's tax filings for the past 3 years show no income from Cascade Valley, despite receiving beneficial distributions. He looked at me. Wire fraud, document forgery, and federal tax evasion. 3 separate charges. That is a complete package, Mrs. Calloway. My husband built most of it, I said. Strom looked at me for a moment. Not the way people look at you when they are deciding what to say. The way they look at you when they understand something precisely and want you to know they do. He was very good, Strom said. Yes, I said. He was. We sat with that for a moment. Outside, the container ship continued its slow passage across the gray water, unhurried and certain of its destination. Strom told me the arrest timeline would depend on coordination with the U.S. Attorney's Office and could not be confirmed to me directly, but that I should expect movement before the end of the month. He would keep Sandra informed. I should behave as though nothing had changed. I should not tell Nathan anything. I should not change anything in the house. I told him I understood. He walked me back to the elevator himself. At the door, he said, with the particular economy of someone who does not say things they do not mean, Thomas Calloway saved us a year of investigative work. Please tell him that. I pressed the elevator button. I'll find a way, I said. The elevator arrived. I stepped in. I was halfway down 2nd Avenue, the document case empty in the passenger seat, when my phone rang through the car speakers. Nathan's name appeared on the screen. I answered. Mom. His voice was measured the voice he used when he was managing something when he needed to sound calm, because he was not. The county recorder's office called this morning. There's an issue with the trust filing, something about the document. They want clarification on a specific term. He paused. I let the pause sit. I'm sure it's just a clerical thing, he said. But I wanted you to know I'm handling it. Of course, I said. Let me know if you need anything. I will. Thanks, Mom. He hung up. I drove. The December light was thin and direct, the kind that finds the windshield at a low angle and makes everything ahead of you very clear. Nathan's voice had been steady. He was good at steady. I had always known that about him, but underneath the steadiness I had heard something I had not heard from him before. Not panic, not yet. Something earlier than panic, the first moment a person realizes that the ground they are standing on may not be where they thought it was. The first crack, like a hairline fracture in glass that has not yet had time to run. I heard the front door close at 7:43. Not a slam, Nathan was too controlled for a slam, but harder than usual with the particular finality of someone who has spent the drive home deciding exactly how this evening will go. I was in the library with a book I had not been reading for the past hour, and I heard it from 2 rooms away. 32 years at the IRS had taught me something about the sound of a man arriving home with a decision already made. It never ends with pleasantries. The pleasantries are the first thing to go. I closed the book. I placed it on the desk beside the manila envelope I had prepared that morning, and I waited. His footsteps crossed the hallway, not the usual sound of someone setting down keys and loosening a tie, but the footsteps of a man still in motion, still in the momentum of whatever had happened that afternoon. He pushed open the library door without knocking. He was still in his jacket. There were dark patches on the shoulders where the rain had not yet dried. He looked at me the way people look at someone when they have rehearsed what they are about to say and are checking whether the room matches their expectations. The county recorder called again, he said. I know, I said. That stopped him for a moment. Just a moment. The document was rejected, he said. The trust is unenforceable. Something about the operative language. He stepped into the room. I need you to sign the corrected version. Tonight. I did not answer. I have a lawyer, Mom. I have documentation showing your diminished capacity over the past 18 months. I have witnesses. His voice was still level, but I could hear what was underneath it now, not the crack from yesterday, but the whole fault line. You don't want this to become a legal process. It will be expensive and unpleasant, and you'll lose. I'm trying to do this properly. Diminished capacity, I said. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to protect the family's assets from probate complications. You know that. I know what you've told me, I said. He put both hands on the back of the chair across from me, and I watched him decide to lean forward, which was a mistake. People who lean forward in a difficult conversation believe they are projecting authority. What they are actually doing is shortening the distance they will have to retreat. Sign the document, Mom. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the morning after Thomas's funeral when Nathan had appeared at the kitchen door with coffee and condolences and a very particular kind of patience. I thought about the sound of suitcase wheels on oak floors. I thought about a bank statement with a 3-year pattern that I recognized in the first 90 seconds. I thought about Thomas in a blue flannel shirt speaking to a camera in a room I had not known he used, saying finish it with the same quietness he had used for 40 years when he meant something completely. I stood up. It was a small thing physically. I am 70 years old. I am not tall, but I had spent 14 weeks sitting in this house in a posture of studied smallness, slightly hunched at the table, slightly vague in the eyes, turning pages of books I had already read twice and pretending they were difficult. I had practiced the stillness of a woman who was losing her edges. I was done with that now. I opened the top drawer of Thomas's desk and I began to place things on the surface between us. The first was a printed transcript of the audio recording from September. Nathan's voice, Dale's voice, the Bellevue Memory Care Facility, the 2-week timeline. I set it down without comment. The second was the top page of Dale's file. The first wire transfer instruction Nathan had sent dated 38 months ago, with Nathan's name in the sender field and Cascade Valley Property Solutions in the recipient field. The third was a copy of the email from February 2021, the one Dale had brought in a canvas bag on a rainy November evening. Subject line, long-term plan, begin phase 1, dated 14 months before Thomas died. The fourth was a side-by-side photocopy Harold Webb's original will on the left, the version Nathan had filed with the probate court on the right. The differences were circled in red. I placed each one flat on the desk, parallel, evenly spaced, the way I used to lay out exhibit documents in a federal review. Then I straightened up and looked at my son. "Sit down, Nathan." Brooke appeared in the doorway behind him. She had come from the kitchen and was still holding a dish towel. She looked at the documents on the desk and then at Nathan and did not move. Nathan did not sit. He looked at the first page, then the second, then moved his eyes across all 4 without picking any of them up. The way a person looks at something they recognize and are trying to decide how to explain. The color in his face changed, not all at once, page by page, the way light changes in a room when a cloud moves across the sun gradually and then completely. "This is not," he started. "I haven't finished," I said. He stopped. 36 months of transfers totaling $186,000. A shell company registered in Oregon 4 months before the first transfer. A will altered with chemical erasure and filed in a probate proceeding, which is a federal offense under 18 U.S.C. 1512. A trust document you just attempted to record that contains a material term error you did not notice before signing. I paused. And a recording in which you and Dale Pruitt discuss placing me in a memory care facility 2 weeks after I signed the paperwork. I had not raised my voice. I had not needed to. In 32 years, I had learned that a flat voice in a quiet room carries further than shouting. The moment they lose control, an old supervisor had told me once standing in a hallway outside an interview room, is the moment you've already won. Your job after that is simply not to lose what you have. Nathan was looking at the February 2021 email. He had picked it up without seeming to realize he had done so. Behind him, Brooke made a small sound and pressed the dish towel to her mouth. I did not look at Brooke. I looked at my son, at the careful, patient, well-dressed man who had planned this while his father was still alive, who had driven here in the rain tonight, believing he could still fix it, who was now holding a piece of paper that told him exactly how long I had known. I waited. The rain came down steadily outside. The mantel clock ticked. Nathan stood very still with the email in his hands, and I watched him understand one sentence at a time that there was nothing left to negotiate. The first snow of the season had arrived sometime in the night. I knew before I looked out the window there is a particular quality to winter silence in Seattle. When snow has fallen, a muffled completeness to the dark that is different from ordinary quiet. I had woken at 5:15 as I had been waking most mornings for the past 6 weeks, and I lay still for a moment listening to the house before I got up. By 6 o'clock, I was in the library with the lamp on and the window showing me Elliott Bay under a thin white light. The water dark and the shore softened by an inch of snow that was still coming down in small, unhurried flakes. The kind of snow that does not announce itself. The kind that simply arrives and changes everything while you are sleeping. I had made 2 cups of coffee as I had every morning for 40 years. The second one sat on the corner of Thomas's desk, cooling in the lamplight. I had not decided whether this was a habit I intended to break. Some habits are not about forgetting. Some habits are about keeping the shape of a thing alive in the room even after the thing itself is gone. Thomas had said once, sitting in this same chair on an evening when a long case had finally closed, and I was too tired to feel the satisfaction I had expected. Justice is just patience with a purpose, Marge. The patience is the hard part. The justice takes care of itself. I had thought about that sentence many times in the past 6 weeks. 6 weeks of nothing visible. 6 weeks of Nathan moving through the house with a controlled tension that had replaced his earlier ease making calls in the car, staying late at his office. Speaking to me with a careful neutrality that told me he had spoken to a lawyer. 6 weeks of Brooke cooking dinner and setting the table and not quite meeting my eyes. 6 weeks of Sandra calling every few days with updates I could not share, and Ray checking in with the particular brevity of a man who understood that the waiting was the work now. I drank my coffee. The snow continued. Somewhere in the house, I heard Nathan's alarm go off at 6:45, the same as every morning. The federal vehicles appeared at the end of the driveway at 7:02. There were 2 of them dark, unmarked, the kind that do not need markings to announce what they are. I watched them from the library window without moving. 3 agents came to the front door. Agent Strom was not among the first 3. He came last, unhurried in a charcoal overcoat, and he glanced at the library window as he came up the walk. I do not know if he saw me behind the glass. He did not give any sign either way. I heard the knock. I heard Brooke's voice, high and uncertain, from the top of the stairs. I heard Nathan's voice lower than a door, then footsteps, several sets of them, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who have done this before and understand that a measured pace is more authoritative than a fast one. I stayed in the library doorway. I did not go upstairs. I did not go to the front hall. I stood at the threshold between the library and the hallway, and I listened to the sounds of my house on a January morning with snow on the bay and 2 cups of coffee on the desk behind me, and I waited. Nathan came down the stairs first. He was dressed someone had let him dress in the dark slacks and the pale blue shirt he wore when he had client meetings. His hands were behind him. He was looking at the floor in front of his feet with the focused attention of a man who has decided that controlling his expression is the last form of control available to him. Brooke came behind him in a robe, her hand on the stair rail. She was already crying, not dramatically, but in the quiet, continuous way of someone who has been crying since before they were fully awake. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she saw me in the library doorway. She crossed the hall in 3 steps and stopped in front of me, and then without warning, she went down onto her knees on the hardwood floor. "Mom." Her voice was uneven. "I want you to know I didn't know about the will. I didn't know about the forgery. I knew about the trust. He told me it was an estate planning arrangement. He told me you had agreed. I didn't know what was in the documents. I didn't understand what it was." She pressed her hand flat against the floor as if she needed something solid. "I swear to you, I didn't know." I looked at her for a long moment. Brooke was 35 years old. She had lived in this house for 6 months. She had poured coffee for a notary and rearranged my kitchen cabinets and called me Mom with the deliberate warmth of someone following a script. I did not know how much of what she was saying was true. I did not know how much she had understood or chosen not to understand or understood and looked away from. That was not my determination to make. "The court will decide what you knew, Brooke," I said. I said it without anger. There was no anger left in me for Brooke, only the flat, clear recognition that some questions belonged to a process larger than a conversation in a hallway. She stayed on her knees for a moment, then stood and moved aside. Nathan had reached the end of the hallway. One of the agents was ahead of him at the front door. Agent Strom was to his left. Nathan stopped. He turned and looked at the library doorway. At me. I had thought about this moment in the way you think about moments you know are coming. Not rehearsing them, but acknowledging them. Making space for them. I had not known what I would feel when it arrived. I had half expected something I could name. Satisfaction, relief. The particular exhaustion that comes at the end of a long effort. What I felt was simpler than any of those things. I felt the weight lift, not joy, not triumph. Just the specific physical sensation of something heavy that you have been carrying long enough to forget it was weight at all. And then it is gone. And the absence of it is the whole of what you notice. Nathan looked at me for 3 seconds. I did not look away. I did not change my expression. I simply looked back at my son across the length of a hallway in a house his father had bought 40 years ago on a street that still smelled of cedar and sea air. Then Agent Strom placed a hand on Nathan's shoulder gently and without hesitation and turned him toward the door. The door opened. Cold air came in from outside, carrying the faint smell of snow, and then they were gone. I stood in the library doorway for a while after the vehicles had pulled away. The second cup of coffee on Thomas's desk had gone completely cold. The snow was still falling soft and indifferent over the bay. The patience is the hard part. The justice takes care of itself. He had been right as he was right about most things. I went back inside, sat down at the desk, and picked up the cold cup anyway. April came to Seattle the way it always does, not suddenly, but gradually, the way a room fills with light when someone opens a curtain in a distant part of the house. The cherry trees on the street had bloomed overnight, it seemed, though I knew they had been building toward it for weeks. I had simply not been watching. The house was quiet in a way it had not been before. There is a difference between the quiet of loss and the quiet of space, returned to its proper owner. The first kind has a density to it. It presses against you, fills the corners, makes rooms feel smaller than they are. I had lived in that quiet since September, since the morning I found the safe door sitting wrong on its hinges. What I had now was the second kind. The rooms were the same size they had always been. The hallways were simply hallways again. Thomas's chair in the library was still his chair. It always would be. But I had begun sitting in it in the evenings with a book and the lamp on, and I had found that the space did not resist me. He had sat there long enough that the chair remembered the shape of a person at rest, and it received me accordingly. The federal sentencing had taken place on a Tuesday in late March. Sandra had called me from outside the courthouse while I waited at home. I had not attended. I had given my testimony by written declaration in February and had chosen not to be in the room for the rest of it. There are endings you need to witness in person and endings you do not. I had already seen the ending I needed to see in a hallway on a January morning with snow on the bay. Nathan had entered a guilty plea on all 3 counts: wire fraud, filing a forged instrument in a federal proceeding, and tax evasion on unreported income. The sentence was 5 years in a federal correctional facility with full restitution of $186,000 to be paid to Margaret Ann Calloway. Dale Pruitt had received a suspended sentence of 3 years and a fine of $35,000 reduced in recognition of his cooperation with the investigation. He had delivered everything he promised and more. I held no particular feeling about Dale. He had made a choice, and then he had made a different one, and the second choice had cost him considerably less than the first would have. Brooke had not been charged. The evidence did not support a prosecution. I did not know whether that was just. I had stopped trying to know things that were not mine to determine. On an afternoon in the second week of April, Sandra called from her office. "Margaret." Her voice carried the particular warmth of someone who has been professional for a long time and is allowing themselves a moment of something else. "Every penny is coming back. The house, the accounts, all of it. The restitution order is final. The asset freeze is dissolved. Everything Thomas built is yours. I was standing at the library window when she called. Elliott Bay was the color of pewter in the afternoon light, with a thin line of blue at the horizon where the overcast was beginning to break. A small sailboat was making its way north unhurried. "Thank Thomas," I said. "He did the hard part." A brief silence on the line. Then Sandra said quietly, "I'll let you have that." After I hung up, I stood at the window for a while longer. I thought about a man in a blue flannel shirt speaking carefully into a camera in a room I had not known he used, building something in secret over 3 years because he loved me and did not know another way to protect what we had made together. I thought about 45 years of mornings. I thought about how the hard part for Thomas had not been the evidence or the planning or the waiting. The hard part had been knowing and saying nothing and trusting that I would be able to finish it. He had been right to trust that. I had done the work. The least I could do was let him have the credit. That evening, I made dinner for one which I had grown accustomed to, and read in Thomas's chair until the light outside had gone from blue to gray, to the particular deep dark that April evenings bring when the clouds return. I had been about to go upstairs when the front bell rang. I set my book down and looked at the clock. 8:41. Through the library window, at an angle, I could see the front porch. Brooke was standing in the spring rain. She was alone. She had no luggage, no umbrella, nothing in her hands. Her coat was dark with rain across the shoulders, in the same way Nathan's jacket had been on the night he came home and closed the front door too hard. She was not looking at the door. She was looking at the ground the way people look when they are not sure they have the right to be where they are, but have come anyway because there was nowhere else left to go. Her eyes, even from this distance and through glass, were red. I stood in the library doorway for a long moment. Then I walked to the front door and put my hand on the latch. I opened the door. Brooke stood on the porch in the April rain, her coat soaked through at the shoulders, her hair flattened against her face. She was not crying now. She had gone past crying into the flat, empty place on the other side of it. She looked at me the way people look when they have rehearsed what they intended to say and have arrived to find that none of it applies anymore. She did not say anything. Neither did I. I stepped back from the door and held it open, and she came inside. I had thought in the months since January about what I would do if Brooke came back. I had not reached a conclusion. There are questions that do not resolve cleanly, that sit at the edge of what you know and refuse to become certain. How much had she understood? How much she had chosen not to ask? Whether the line between complicity and willful blindness is a line that matters, or whether it is simply the story a person tells themselves to make the distance between who they are and what they allowed seem larger than it was. I did not know the answers. I was not sure I ever would. Thomas had told me once on an evening after a case that had ended badly for everyone involved that forgiveness was not a verdict. "It isn't for them, Marge," he had said, sitting in his chair with a glass of water and the particular tiredness of a man who has thought carefully about something difficult. "It's for you. It's the decision to stop carrying it. You can make that decision without knowing everything. You don't have to resolve every question first. I had not fully understood that at the time. I understood it better now. I brought Brooke to the library. The fire was low but still going, and I added 2 pieces of wood and adjusted the screen. Brooke sat in the chair nearest the hearth without being directed to it, as if her body had made the decision before she had. She put her hands in her lap and looked at the fire and did not speak. I went to the restoration table. The book I had been working on for the past 3 weeks was a mid-19th century natural history volume. Cloth binding, water-damaged spine. Several pages along the back matter that had been stuck together for longer than anyone could reliably say. I had been working on the last of those pages all week. Tonight, by some coincidence that I was too old to call anything other than what it was, the final page was ready to be set. I worked in the quiet. The library held the sounds it had always held at this hour, the low breath of the fire, the occasional shift of wood settling the rain against the single window that faced the side garden. Brooke did not speak. I did not require her to. There are kinds of presence that do not need to be explained or justified, that are simply the fact of a person in a room. And I had learned over 70 years that silence shared between two people is not the same thing as silence endured alone. I did not know what Brooke would do next. I did not know where she would go or what the courts would eventually make of her role in what had happened, or whether the years ahead would be ones she looked back on with shame or with some harder-earned understanding. Those were her questions to carry. They did not belong to me. What belonged to me was this room, this table, this book. The small exacting work of returning something damaged to a state in which it could be used again, not perfectly, not as though nothing had happened, but legibly, functionally. With the history of what it had survived still visible in the repaired spine, the careful stitching, the slightly irregular edge of a page that had once been lost. Some things once broken do not go back to what they were. They become something else, something that has been broken and repaired, which is different and which has its own integrity if you allow it to. I set the last page. I held it under the weighted board and waited for the adhesive to take. When I lifted the board, the page held. I closed the book carefully, spine up, and set it on the drying rack the way I always did, gently, without ceremony, because the work does not require ceremony, only patience and attention and the willingness to keep going. Then I picked it up and carried it to the shelf. I stood and looked at it for a moment. The cloth spine repaired. The boards realigned, 160 years old and still readable. I took the next volume down. Behind me, near the fire, Brooke's breathing had changed slower, more even the breathing of someone who has been awake for too long and has finally allowed themselves to stop. I did not turn around. At some point, she asked very quietly, not quite awake, "Can I stay just for tonight?" I did not look up from the page in front of me. "The guest room is made up," I said. The rain continued outside. The fire burned low. I turned a page and then another, and the house was quiet in the way it was quiet now, not empty, but settled like a room that has been returned to the people who belong in it. I kept working. People have asked me how I stayed so calm, how I sat at that breakfast table, smiled, and played the role of a woman losing her edges while quietly building a case that would take everything back. This family drama story is about exactly that, the kind of quiet strength most people never see coming. My answer is simple. I was never truly alone. Thomas had done the hard part, and God, I believed, had given me the patience to finish it. This is what I would tell you directly. Don't be like me. Don't wait until they come for your accounts, your home, your mail, while grief has barely dried. Put your documents in order today. Tell someone you trust where the real papers are. Love is not always protection. Sometimes love needs a plan behind it. Among all family revenge stories, this one hits differently because the manipulation was real, the forgery was real, and the betrayal came from inside the home. Family drama stories like this exist not to entertain, but to remind us what we risk when we look away from the people closest to us. The most dangerous family revenge stories are the ones that begin with silence, and mine was no exception. If this moved something in, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. Subscribe because the next family drama story is already waiting. These family revenge stories stay with us because they speak to something we all understand. Thank you for staying until the very last page. Upcoming stories contain fictional elements created for educational purposes. If this content isn't right for you, we respect that. Please explore what suits you better.
Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next time.